the echo of tomorrow. When the light faded, Nigel found himself standing on a surface that felt like solid cloud. The year was 2150, but the city he expected was gone. Instead, there was a vast, quiet expanse of geometric architecture that seemed to grow out of the earth like crystal. He reached out to touch a spire, and it hummed a low, melodic note that vibrated in his very marrow. The silence here was not an absence of sound, but a presence of peace so profound it felt alien. Derek wandered toward a fountain where the water did not fall, but drifted upward in perfect, shimmering spheres. He realized that the gravity here was a suggestion rather than a law. He caught one of the spheres in his hand, and instead of wetting his skin, it filled his mind with a sudden, vivid memory of a sunset he had never seen. This future did not just house the body, it seemed to curate the soul, offering a paradise of sensory perfection that defied every logic he knew. They reunited under a sky that transitioned from violet to deep emerald in a rhythmic pulse. Nigel pointed toward the horizon, where figures moved with a grace that suggested they were made of light and intention. "Is this a utopia, Derek?" Nigel whispered, his voice sounding brittle in the perfect air. "Or is it a museum where humanity has finally put itself on a shelf?" They walked together through a doorway that wasn't there until they intended to pass through it, feeling the world respond to their every thought. Nigel stopped before a structure that resembled a giant, ticking clock, but its hands were made of flowing sand and moved in directions that made no sense. He looked at his own shadow and saw that it was detached, dancing a few paces behind him. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of nostalgia for the chaos of his own time, for the dirt, the noise, and the beautiful, messy struggle of being unfinished. In this perfect future, he felt like a smudge on a masterpiece. Derek sat on a bench that felt like a warm breath. He looked at his reflection in a pool of mercury and saw not himself, but a version of himself that looked entirely at peace, devoid of the lines of worry and the spark of ambition. It terrified him. If there was no more hunger, no more grief, and no more striving, what was left of the human spirit? He wondered if this utopia was a reward for surviving the centuries, or a gentle extinction of the things that made them real. The rift reappeared, a jagged tear of familiar, harsh light in the middle of the serenity. Nigel and Derek felt the pull of their own era, a gravity of history and debt. They gripped each other's arms as the crystalline world began to dissolve into streaks of color, like a painting left out in the rain. The piece of 2150 hummed one last time, a siren song of stay, but the ticking of their own hearts pulled them back toward the fray. The transition was a violent jolt of heat and noise. Nigel collapsed onto the cold floor of the laboratory, the smell of dust and old books rushing into his lungs like a tonic. He gasped, his fingers clutching the worn rug. The silence was gone, replaced by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car horn. He looked at the machine, now dead and smoking, and felt a crushing sense of reality returning, heavy and unyielding. Derek stood by the window, watching the gray rain wash over the city street below. He looked at his hands, expecting to see the light of the future still clinging to his skin, but there was only the pale, ordinary flesh of a man in the present. He wondered if Nigel had seen the same things, or if they had simply shared a madness born of desperation. The memory of the floating water felt like a dream that was already beginning to fray at the edges. They sat across from each other at the wooden table, a single, glowing seed they had brought back, or perhaps imagined, resting between them. Nigel looked at Derek, his eyes searching for an answer. "Was it better?" Nigel asked softly. Derek looked at the seed, then at the dirty, vibrant world outside. "It was perfect," Derek replied, "and that might be why it was worse." They remained there in the quiet of the room, two ghosts of a future they could no longer be certain had ever existed.
It's time to unite the kingdom.